The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is Jim Ostrowski with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and I welcome you to our Michigan High Water Virtual Town Hall. Glad you all can join us today. We've got a lot of good presentations planned and a lot of people that registered to attend this event. So very glad to see so much interest in it. A couple housekeeping guidelines, and I'll repeat these several times as I know we got a lot of people joining us. First of all lines are muted, which means that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you do have a question though during the webinar, feel free to type it into the GoToWebinar question box you have over to the right of your screen. And what we'll do is after the presentations tonight, we will go ahead and answer those questions best we can. I'm sure we're going to get more than what we can handle because I'll tell you, we've got over 1,000 people registered. So that's a lot of questions that we'll probably be getting. So sit tight with us. We'll do the best we can. Good news is that we're recording the webinar and we will post it, make it available as soon as possible, and everyone that registers, we will send you a link to where you can find that as soon as it's available, probably tomorrow or Monday if I can. So here's our presenters tonight. We're going to be going all around Michigan, and I'll warn you that we are all broadcasting from our own remote locations. So most of us are in our houses doing this tonight, presenting. Jim Ostrowski, that's me. I'll be the moderator tonight. Deanna Apps from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be presenting next. Jared Sanders and Phil Argeroth from Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy are also presenting from their locations. Vicki McGee from Michigan Department of Natural Resources is going to do a presentation. Josh Nehart from Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development is here. And Brad Weiferick is going to also be doing a presentation from Michigan Department of Transportation. Okay, in terms of our agenda this evening, we're going to cover a lot of stuff and try to get through as much as we can. You can see it right here. Got a Water 101 Great Lake water levels presentation, Eagle permitting and shoreline erosion presentation, agricultural impacts, state lands and state parks and impacts, and transportation issues. So we're going to try to touch on all these things as our presenters from around the state do that. Just a couple, I didn't want to go to that slide. And with that, like I said, got a lot of people that just joined again. I want to remind everybody that your lines are muted. And if you have a question, you can type it into the question box that you have over to your right on your toolbar there. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our first presenter, Deanna. Deanna, you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, great. Just show your screen and we'll get started.
Here we go. I just got it.
There you go.
Please going. All right.
All right, take it away.
Hopefully you can see my screen. All right. So yeah, I'm just gonna. My name is Deanna Apps. I work out of the Detroit District Corps of Engineers office. I also want to note on the line tonight is two colleagues of mine, Crystal Walker from Emergency Management Office and Charlie Simon from our Regulatory Department as well, that also both work for the Detroit District and Corps of Engineers. I'm going to talk briefly about the Water 101 and the 6-month forecast for Great Lakes water levels, and then we'll be passing it on. So I just first want to note that this high water that we've seen over the last year has really been basin-wide. These are 4 pictures from Lake Superior, Lake Michigan Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. You can see that there's been impacts felt basin-wide from shoreline flooding and erosion and wave impacts as well across the Great Lakes since really the spring of last year. So as we get started, I just want to talk about some notes about Great Lakes water levels. First, that they are measured as an elevation above sea level and in reference to the International Great Lakes Datum of 1985. As you hear me talk, you'll hear me say Lake Michigan, Huron. We consider Michigan and Huron one lake as they're connected at the Straits of Mackinac, so they rise and fall together. On our webpage, you can access lake-wide daily average water levels. And at the end of each month, we take those lake-wide daily means and compute monthly mean water levels. And that's the basis of the water levels that we typically report, especially those are the ones we use in our 6-month forecast as well. Those daily lake-wide average levels are computed based off the network of water level gauges. So each lake uses a number, anywhere from, like on Lake Michigan here, I think it's about 6 water level gauges we use to compute that lake-wide daily mean. And we do that so that's really based on still water. So we're averaging out any type of meteorological impact, such as like what you see from wind. So those are how we measure water levels. At the Detroit district, we are the keeper of official monthly water level statistics. We have monthly mean water level data that goes back to 1918 and current through 2019. We coordinate that data with Environment and Climate Change Canada. We work very closely with them. We coordinate a few of our data sets as well as we work with them on our 6-month forecast as well. And as you'll hear me stress in this presentation, that the primary drivers of water levels are changing weather patterns and then how that resulting impact is on the water supply to the lakes. So I know probably mostly everybody's aware of the Great Lakes Basin, but I always like to show kind of an aerial view that you're seeing there on the right, and then a side profile view, which you're seeing at the bottom left. So everything highlighted in that green area on that picture on the right is the basin outline. So that's a Great Lakes Basin. Obviously, it's large, covering 8 states and 2 provinces on over 14,000 miles of shoreline. On the diagram on the left, this gives you a good idea of how water is flowing through the system. So beginning in Lake Superior, water flows through the St. Mary's River into Lakes Michigan and Huron, through the St. Clair River into Lake St. Clair, through the Detroit River into Lake Erie, through the Niagara River over the Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario, and then out through the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. I do want to note here that there are 2 places in the system where outflows are regulated, one being through the St. Mary's River from Lake Superior into Lake Michigan, Huron, and then the other when water flows out of Lake Ontario through the St. Lawrence River. The regulation of these outflows is the responsibility of their respective boards of control. So the International Lake Superior Board of Control and the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board. And all of those are run, though both those boards are run under the authority of the International Joint Commission. I want to stress, though, although we are able to regulate outflow, that does not allow us to regulate lake level. Water levels are mainly driven by Mother Nature. So what are some other factors that are impacting water levels? So, of course, we have to account for the inflow from the upstream lake and the outflow out of that lake. So, for example, Lake Michigan Huron, we have to account for the inflow from the St. Mary's River, and we have to account for the outflow that goes out through the St. Clair River. But the main piece that's highlighted in red there is what we call net basin supply. And that's really the water supply to the lake. So that accounts for your precipitation to the lake, your runoff to the lake, and then your evaporation off of the lake surface. So your net basin supply is really precipitation plus runoff minus evaporation. So what does this look like annually? So water levels in the Great Lakes, they go through seasonal cycles where typically you see your seasonal low in the winter. This is when snow is accumulating and the ground is typically frozen, and we reach our seasonal low January, February, or even sometimes March on like Lake Superior. Then as we enter the spring, when you have snow melt, increased runoff, and increased rainfall, we start to see water levels rise. Like last year, we experienced very large rises with very wet conditions. And then as we get into the summer, you typically see water levels peak as the increased sunshine then warms the lake water surfaces. As we head into the fall, that's usually the period of seasonal decline, late fall, early winter. When you start to have that cold air moving over the warm lake water, that's when you really induce evaporation, and that's what really drives water level decline in the fall. So next, I'm going to talk about the full period of record here. So we can see this is the blue line is your monthly mean water levels going back to 1918 through February of 2020. You can see there's a hydrograph for each lake, Lake Superior at the top, Michigan, Huron, St. Clair, Erie, and Ontario all the way down. That red line is the long-term average annual level. So as we talked about on the last slide, you can see those seasonal or the annual cycle in water levels in this chart. I like to, when I'm looking at this, I try to focus like on Lake Michigan, Huron, that second hydrograph, just because I feel like on that one, it's a little bit easier to diagnose these periods of high and low water. So when we look through that period of record, we can see that there have been periods of high and low water levels on the Great Lakes. There's high water in the early 50s, probably the most time that we remember high water back in the mid 80s. But then we also just recently experienced a decade plus of low water. From the late 1990s to about the mid 2010s. Actually, Lake Michigan Huron hit a record low in January of 2013. And then after that, we saw a period of record rise on the lake, and then really culminating in these record high water levels in 2019 and 2020. So what are some of the records we've seen? So in 2019, we started setting monthly mean water level records in May of 2019 on Lake Superior, St. Clair, and Erie. And each of those lakes continued to set records through September of 2019. You can also see that in June and July, Lake Ontario also set record high water levels for those respective months. You can see that in June and July, there's asterisks next to Lake Erie and Ontario in June and St. Clair in July. Those are the highest monthly mean on record for all months in our period of record. As you can see, we closed out 2019 in October, November, and December with no records being set in those last 3 months, although we were very close. You can also notice that in 2019, Lakes Michigan, Huron did not set a monthly mean water level record in 2019. However, that story has now changed in 2020. So far in 2020, we've seen Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, Huron set records in both January and February. And then Lake St. Clair tied its record in January 2020, and last month in February, Lake Erie also set a monthly mean record for that month as well. So why are levels so high? How did we get here? And what you're looking at here, this is showing precipitation ranks for the Great Lakes Basin. And this data is all on the U.S. side of the basin. So what we're seeing here is that out of 120 plus years of records, we've seen the wettest 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and 5 year period in the Great Lakes Basin. So we've just continued to see persistent wet conditions over several years that have really allowed water levels to transition from a low water period to this now high water period that we're in. So next, I'm just going to go through the forecast. And I'll go through it for each lake. Just so you understand kind of what you're looking at. The blue line is the long-term average monthly mean water levels. That blue dash represents the long-term average. The red solid line represents what the actual monthly mean water levels over the last 2 years. And then those dashes represent the level and the year of the record high and low. These are based off of chart datum. So the 0 line is a base level, and then each line is 2 inches. And then you can see on the left, there is the feet in measurement. So +1, +2 based off that chart datum. So I've highlighted there the 2019 records on Lake Superior, as you can see from May through September of 2019. Those purple arrows are representing those records that were set so far in 2020 in January and February. Then you'll see that this forecast, so our forecast is for March through August, since we did this at the beginning of the month. That red dashed line or that red bar that extends out for the forecast, that's our 90% confidence interval. The green dashed line you're seeing is what we call our most probable level that we expect to occur. So you can see for Lake Superior, we expect it to complete its seasonal decline in March before it begins to rise. We do expect over the next 6 months for water levels to be 2 to 4 inches below record high levels over the next 6 months. For Lake Michigan Huron, you can see that really in 2019, it didn't really see much of a decline this past year, much of a seasonal decline. So it started to set records in January and February of 2020. It's forecasted to begin its seasonal rise. Really, it's starting to happen now and then into April. The February level was 17 inches above the February 2019 level, so we are tracking higher than last year due to that low decline we've seen. And right now, our forecast is predicting record high over the next 6 months, so 1 to 5 inches above record high levels over the next 6 months on Lake Michigan Huron. For Lake St. Clair, you can also see those records set last year, May through September, which I've highlighted in that yellow box. It tied its record in January 2020. And then over the next 6 months, we can see it's kind of in its period of seasonal rise. And for the forecast from March through May is that we'll see 1 to 2 inches above record high levels over the next 3 months here. But we do expect in June, July, and August to be below those records that were set last year in 2019. This is a similar case for Lake Erie, where again, it's in its period of seasonal rise. We did set a record in February of 2020, and we do expect again that March through May time period to continue to see record high water levels. But again, come June, July, August, we expect to be below those record levels that were set in 2019. And then lastly, Lake Ontario, again, this, you can see the record set in June and July of last year. It's in its period of seasonal rise. We are still tracking above last year, and really over the next 6 months, although the band is much larger here, the most probable is still 10 to 18 inches above long-term average. So still well above average over the next 6 months for Lake Ontario. Leave with some final key points. Just water levels on all the Great Lakes have started 2020 higher than 2019, except for Lake Michigan Huron. All lakes are forecasted to peak below 2019 levels. Water level fluctuations, again, are primarily driven by weather patterns, and that regulation of outflows at the St. Mary's and St. Lawrence River, as we talked about previously, cannot prevent extreme high or low water levels, nor fully control water levels. It's not what they're meant to do. The impact of high water is still to be felt through well into 2020, and this will be a long duration event. Lastly, I just want to leave with some contact information. So this is we have a Great Lake High Water webpage. You can see that kind of the outline there on the left. Those top 4 contacts are anyone, including myself there, Deanna Apps, if you have any questions related to water levels there. As far as questions about emergency management, we encourage you to contact your local emergency management agency for the most up-to-date information. Also, there are resources on the High Water webpage, very helpful links, and additional contact information. Again, you can reach out to that email there, where you can also send questions to as well. And then finally, regulatory, which handles our permitting. You can also send questions there if your questions related to permitting. We do have, like I mentioned in the beginning, from the Corps, people from Crystal Walker from Emergency Management and Charlie Simon from Regulatory that are also on the line that could answer questions related to both of those as well. And that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Deanna. As we move on to our next presenter here in just a minute, just want to, Deanna, just a quick question that came in was those charts that you showed on your screen. Those were, where can people access those? the water level charts?
So they can access those on our webpage. You can get to them by going on our that Great Lakes High Water webpage, but I guess probably the easiest way is just Google Detroit District water level forecast, and it'll bring you right to the first link should be the forecast page. So even just Googling Great Lakes water level forecast should get you to those graphics, and that's called our 6-month bulletin forecast on our webpage there.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going next to Jared Sanders with the Water Resource Division at Eagle. Jared, before you start, just want to let people know that came in late that all lines are muted, and if you have a question, you can type it into the question box over on your GoToWebinar toolbar. Take it away, Jared.
Well, good evening, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm going to skip through a couple slides at the start because Deanna did a really nice job of explaining why this is happening, because it's been raining a lot, and that's the biggest driver of what our lake levels are. Wanted to just pause on this slide. So the first couple of slides I actually lifted from Andy Dixon, who's on the phone, but he's muted, so I don't think there's anything he can do about it. This is a graph that shows basically river flows, cumulative river flow for the Tittabawassee River in Midland. And pretty much if you look at major river systems, almost all the major river systems show a trend similar to this. Each of these squiggly lines on this graph represents a flow for a given year. For this graph, the year begins in October, ends in September. And as you can see, I tried to count the lines on here. It's somewhere around 60 years of records if you look at 2020, so the year we're in right now, starting in October. River flows are high all over the state. In fact, it's an anomaly when you look at, compare it to all the past records that we have. And in fact, the Tittabawassee through Midland in the first 4 months passed more than what we would get in an average year of total flow. So basically 12 months of flow in a 4-month period. And the reason I'm illustrating this is I'm going to talk about impacts here a little bit, but what gets the most amount of attention is the shoreline impacts. But what's happened with all this rain is not only do we have these high Great Lakes water levels, but the rest of the state is saturated too, and that's leading to all kinds of impacts that our presenters will talk about. So the sponge is full. There's no place left to store water, and so we're seeing impacts everywhere, inland and on the coast. So the biggest ticket item, the item that's got the most amount of attention, are the residential shoreline impacts. There you can find all kinds of pictures all over the internet if you want to. I've pretty much intentionally tried to keep people's homes as much as I could out of the presentation. And a lot of the attention has been on the west coast of lower Michigan because that's where the impacts have been the most severe, but it is happening all over the state, high water levels. We get the typical severe storms that we get on the Great Lakes, and it's causing obviously substantial and obvious property damage. The picture on the left top there is in Berrien County. The bottom right picture is in Escanaba, and the top right you can see actually the sort of undermined part of the foundation of the house. Other really know the emergency managers and Gennard as well as the sort of public health and safety aspect of this because of all of the erosion and the amount of stairs and docks and different ancillary structures like sheds that have already gone into the lake have created a huge debris problem. So not only are homeowners in a lot of cases fighting to keep their homes, but we have this sort of potential real issue when we get into the recreational season of the health and safety of users of the Great Lakes. this has been really catastrophic for people that live along the lakeshore. There's no doubt about that. And it's been a huge challenge. What we do know is we kind of know the solutions for shoreline erosion. You either put in some type of shoreline protection, or you move what's in the way of the erosion. And I don't mean to minimize that at all, because what we're talking about are very, very expensive impacts. And I know this question will come up. It's probably Jim's probably already looking at it, but right now there are no state or federal programs to provide funding to private businesses or homeowners to assist with mitigation, so putting in shoreline protection and moving homes or that type of thing. So one of the things that hasn't gotten as much attention that we're seeing, that we saw, you know, all year last year, and then particularly in Michigan and Huron, we expect to be as bad or worse this year, are the infrastructure impacts. So we've already seen these impacts everywhere. From a wastewater standpoint, we're seeing impacts in terms of collection, treatment, and discharge. Having this high water creates all kinds of problems. Even like, for example, old sewer lines that are leaky add a lot of additional groundwater. As the groundwater tables have come up, add groundwater into that wastewater system. So it's collecting more, it's got to treat more volume. And that's been a real challenge for a lot of municipalities. We've seen direct drinking water impacts in terms of intakes and threats to storage. In the top right picture there, you can see, I think it's M25 in Sanilac County, is MDOT thoroughfare. This past winter, and maybe MDOT will talk about this a little bit, but very close to having a failure of M25, and certainly losing that road is a huge issue, but these are also our thoroughfares for other infrastructure like drinking water lines, like power lines. You can see, if you can see in the picture there, there's a partially failing overhead transmission line. And then as we see these impacts, not just from shoreline erosion, but also from coastal flooding, that can have a huge impact on our public safety and public health infrastructure in terms of how do we get emergency services to people, and how do we protect human health. In the top left, that's the Milk River Combined Sewer Overflow Treatment Retention Treatment Basin. Last summer, it was within an inch or two. You can see they're failing, at which point that basin would not be able to treat combined sewer overflows and protect public health. And so we're seeing these substantial impacts, both from erosion and from shoreline inundation and inland all over the state. So the top left is Jefferson Chalmers in the Detroit area. Again, I mentioned shoreline flooding and inundation, so it's not just erosion, but also in our low-lying coastal areas, we have substantial problems with flooding and inundation. And again, Lakes Michigan and Huron, as Deanna mentioned, look a little bit worse this year than they did last year. And that's the predominance of our shoreline. And so that, again, we see property damage, private and public property damage in all of these situations, and see the same impacts: infrastructure damage, public safety. The top right is Harson's Island in Lake St. Clair. And so our low-lying coastal areas have seen huge impacts as well. Inland flooding as well. This is an area that is, I don't know if expanding is the right word, but we are seeing a ton of inland lakes where lake levels, as the groundwater tables come up, lake levels come up. And so we've seen a ton of, particularly kettle lakes that don't have an outlet, where there is flooding, property damage, and potentially huge public health implications with it too, in terms of if there's septic systems there. You know, septic systems don't function when they're underwater to treat on-site wastewater. And then how is that going to affect our recreation and tourism? So what is Eagle doing about it? We are, from a permitting standpoint, we have a joint permitting process for lakeshore programs with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's one application, 2 permits. You get both of the required permits if you need a shoreline permit for the work that you're going to do. And we are expediting those permits and issuing emergency permits. And in the most dire situations, meaning the house is about ready to go, we're using discretion in doing after the fact permitting. What we need is homeowners and contractors to communicate with us. We need to work those situations out together. We're prioritizing based on risk to homes, critical infrastructure, and human health and safety. We're engaging with our on infrastructure issues with the regulated community that we work with, and we're also working pretty closely with federal and state partners, federal, state, and local partners in terms to share information and resources to do the best we can with the situation at hand. From a permitting standpoint, you can see as the lake levels have risen from 2014 to 2019, our shoreline permits have gone up right along with that. We've diverted a ton of staffing resources out to the lakeshore to make sure that we're expediting permits for people, taking a permitting process that used to average about 60 days of processing. In the first quarter of this year, the average was 15. But again, those are prioritized based on risk. We want to make sure everyone has a pathway to protect the property that's most important to them. And then in the first quarter of this year, so October through December, we actually issued over 500 Great Lakes permits, and the second quarter is going to close, and we're going to have done pretty close to another 500. So we'll be right around 1,000 permits in 6 months here, last 6 months. This is actually a letter we can get that went out to 25,000 addressees that have our discharge permits with us, asking them to do infrastructure or to do an analysis of their vulnerability of their system for high water levels. And we've got some guidance up on our webpage and are working with folks to work through that process so that people that discharge stormwater and wastewater are on track. And we're now working pretty closely. That we had a high water coordinating summit back in February, and we're really trying to work very closely with our state, local, and federal partners to make sure we're collaborating to do the best we can. So I'm moving very fast because I want to give the other presenters time, but hopefully we can get back to questions here. So what should you do? The big thing is, we just heard it from Deanna and you're hearing it from me. The Lakes Michigan and Huron are probably not going to be better this year. It's probably going to be worse. There's a backlog of contractors and there's a backlog of services, and we are doing the best we can to get permits out. But if you get started before the situation becomes critical, it's really important you find an experienced professional. If you don't know how to get started, you can go to www.michigan.gov/high-water, all one word. And that is currently our webpage. It'll shift to more of a statewide or state-based webpage in a little while, but you can still always go there. There actually is a contractors list there. And then if you need to talk to someone, we are staffing up a line to talk to people about high water. That phone number is there, 800-662-9278. You tell the operator you're calling about high water, and they'll get you to one of our permitting staff. Very quickly, I want to go through and I know I'm running a little long here, but I think this is really important because there's a lot of questions on this. The Governor Whitmer's Executive Order 2020-21 dealing with the coronavirus response, and a lot of questions about whether contractors can continue to do shoreline work and emergency work under that directive. The first thing I'm going to tell you is, if you're a contractor, you need to go to the michigan.gov/coronavirus, click on resources, executive orders and directives, and you need to read the executive order, and you need to read the frequently asked questions document. I actually think the frequently asked questions document does a good job of laying out the sort of 3 different ways that work is permissible. And I think it does a very good job, frankly, of tying in with what we're trying to do, so that a lot of the shoreline work probably is permissible, but it's project by project. Is it necessary to maintain and improve safety, sanitation, and essential operations of residences? If yes, then the frequently asked questions document clearly says that it's permissible. A lot of the shoreline work probably fits under that, but you need to go there, you need to read it. Obviously, the governor's office is completely overwhelmed because industries all over the state are trying to figure this out. But it is really important what we're trying to do to stop the spread of this disease. So we'll help you as best as we can, but you really need to start by going there and reading it. So that's all I have, Jim. Thanks. Sorry I ran long.
Okay, thanks, Jared. Questions keep coming in, and want to remind people we'll take questions at the end and try to get through as many as we can. Our next presenter tonight is Vicki McGee from Department of Natural Resources. So Vicki, I am going to hand it over to you next at your location.
Okay. All right.
Gotcha.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go over fairly quickly just some of the impacts that we have seen within the facilities that the state parks, the Parks and Recreation Division manages. So that includes state parks, recreation areas. We also administer boating access sites and harbors and marinas. So the first facility that we're looking at here is Orchard Beach State Park. It's on Lake Michigan. And you can see just in the 6 years of time how much of the beach we've lost. And then at this particular park, we've been seeing an extreme amount of erosion, probably amongst some of the worst. This is a photograph, an aerial photograph at Orchard Beach, and the building in the kind of in the background there is a historic pavilion, and it's probably about 10 feet away from the edge of the bluff. And so right now, we've been working for a couple of years now with an engineering firm to see what what are our options, studying the soils. Is it possible to save it and preserve it, or do we need to take other measures? So we're trying to work pretty aggressively to see if we can save that building. This is Muskellunge State Park. It's in the eastern UP on Lake Superior, and these photographs were taken just a few months ago in November. And you can see what some of the damages are, look like. Throughout the system, the shoreline erosion is so extensive that the vegetation is sloughing off and continues to make the whole shoreline very unstable. This is Wells State Park. We're in the western UP, and this is on Lake Michigan. These photographs were taken in December. In the photo on the left was an improvement that we made. I believe it was about 2006. We had these overlooks, and there was quite a bit more shoreline between the overlook and the water's edge. And then very recently, we began to throw some armoring stone in front of it just to see if we can preserve it. Again, more collapsed vegetation along the shore, and then the photograph on the right shows a retaining wall that's beginning to slough in. And you can see it looks like where the flag is, flagpole, and then the earth has slumped in, and picnic tables upended. So on Lake Michigan, this would be in the southwest shoreline. We have Holland State Park, and the channel leading inland, that lake level had gotten so high that very routinely we had waves lapping over the edge of it throughout 2019. And then one particularly bad storm event in November really tore up and just removed a lot of the walkway that used to be along the edge of the railing that you see there. And if you look at the picture on the right, you can see the, by looking at the root ball of the existing tree, you can have more appreciation for the amount of erosion that occurred really just from that one particular storm. In Southeast Michigan, as a part of Detroit, here's Belle Isle Park. Last year, we experienced a flooding of approximately 1/3 of the island, and it took a better part of 5 to 7 months for that water to recede. It flooded a very unique woodland that we have there. You can see on the picture on the left, there's a historic bell tower, and the flooding was all around that. We had lost use of one of our main road systems in there, so a lot of our visitors and staff had to be diverted. So it was a huge problem with flooding on that island. On the northeast side, Lake Huron, this is Tawas State Park, and I've circled the image on the left just to show you that the picture in the middle is that segment of road. Really, we started to have issues with erosion here, I would say about 2016, and some of the armoring that you see, was occurring right about that time. And then this is what Tawas looks like. This was in 2020. We took this picture. If you look at the image on the left, you can see a lagoon and a relationship to a pavilion, and the kind of yellowish dashed line is what the shoreline looks like in 2020, and that was taken right about in January. And so the lagoon is now has been consumed by Lake Huron. And this is just another, just a different photograph of what used to separate the lagoon and Lake Huron. And in 1 year's time, 15 foot of the dune was lost completely. And then the photograph on the left, we had been throwing armor stone down along the shoreline. It was not very substantial in size, and so the wave action really just kind of threw the stone right back up onto the day use road. This is kind of, this particular area of the park is like a peninsula, and if the water continues to rise any more than it did last year, we anticipate that the whole unit could be largely underwater and closed to the public. And this is not exclusive to Tawas. There are other parks where we're anticipating we'll have full units closed because of the high water levels that we're seeing. This is McLean State Park. It's in the western UP. It's on Lake Superior, and this is what we call our West Campground Shoreline. We started to see significant erosion in 2014, and in fact, there's some stretches of the shoreline that have these giant gabion baskets that were put there probably back in the 1980s when we had the last high water effects there. The encroachment was getting so bad that we did have to take some extreme measures. We relocated a campground road, multiple campsites. We had to relocate utilities, and then we have been armoring the shoreline there. So this has been a multiple phase project at McLean. And one of the most recent showing here is at the Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park. This is also in the western UP along Lake Superior. And the road there that you're looking at is County Road 107. The road is actually operated and administered by Ontonagon County Road Commission, but the severity and the speed of the erosion that was occurring in 2018 and 19 was so extreme that, and this is the only access route into the major feature of the Porcupine Mountains, which is Lake of the Clouds. And so we partnered with the County Road Commission. We do have a construction crew in that area, and the construction crew has some very large earth moving equipment. You can see that in the picture on the lower right. And we spent quite a few months of time working with the county and using our crew and our equipment to armor the shoreline pretty substantially. And that, even though we had finished that up, I would say by about midsummer, again, another storm event threatened more of the road. And so we did go in back, very late in the year to complete more of the shoreline armoring. I will say that overall, the not only the shoreline erosion, but the high soil saturation levels that we've seen throughout the state have resulted in a lot of flooding. So many of our parks, campgrounds in particular, have flooded out and have impacted some of the user experiences. What you haven't seen tonight are any photographs of our waterways facilities. COVID has kept me pretty busy and prior to tonight, and so I don't have any on the slides here, but any boating access sites that we operate, there have been many that were closed last year, and I anticipate would continue to be closed because of the high water level and flooding that we've experienced have really impacted the usability of those facilities. The same would be true for our marinas and harbors. Not only the state-operated facilities, but also many of our local partners who are our grant and aid communities. Right now, we have been consistently assessing the impacts and the damages, not only to our state facilities, but with our grant and aid partners. Coming up pretty quick here is the submittal time for our grant requests for the year, and we've had it posted on that website that priority is going to be given to emergencies due to high water. So we are anticipating that many of our partners are going to be submitting grant requests for those more urgent needs as opposed to capital improvements that would be to upgrade, for example, some of their facilities. And as Jared had mentioned earlier, the debris on our beaches and shorelines is very worrisome because we do often get a lot of visitors who like to walk up and down the beach. And so it is going to be a huge challenge for us to try and allow our visitors to be safe when they're visiting any of the state parks or recreation areas. We're not too sure of this, how substantial some of the impacts will be to our marinas, but they were already being highly impacted by the high waters last year. At times, some overlapping some of the dock systems that we had and potentially impacting the utilities that commonly are underneath those dock systems. And so it is possible that some of our boating guests would have more rustic experiences if they are able to dock in some of the marinas that we have this year. So it's a big waiting game, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're working very hard to stay on top of and recognize the highest and most urgent needs. So that's pretty much, that's a quick recap of what's going on with Parks and Recreation Division of the DNR.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. I'm going to bring it back here because next presenter is Josh Nahart. Oops, don't want to bring it to me. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Josh, you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Let me just bring your slide up here. All right, go ahead.
All right, everybody, I really appreciate everyone who was able to join us tonight. As was mentioned earlier, the residential shoreline impacts are kind of the big ticket item that have really grabbed the attention of Michiganders. But the high water issues have actually been impacting Michigan for some time now. Last year in Michigan, out of the 10 million acres of agriculture land, 1 million were planted what's called prevent plant. That was 10% of the farming. Prevent plant essentially means the farmers weren't able to plant their commodities. And that was a record for the state of Michigan. And we are one of the most diverse agriculture states in the country. We grow all kinds of commodity here, from dry bean to tart cherries to asparagus, celery, corn, and soybean. The agriculture industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry here. So it took a very big hit last year. We started to get word around this time last year. It was, trickling through the channels that many farmers weren't able to plant in their fields. They were finding standing water, they were finding lots of mud, and those are just conditions you simply can't grow in. Unfortunately, those conditions did not improve, and as the season went on, things got much more dire. So late in the spring, the governor wrote a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, requesting a disaster declaration for the state of Michigan from the USDA. We received that late in the year. 73 of Michigan's 83 counties were designated disaster areas, which opened up what was called WIP plus funding, basically one of the many pots of disaster money that the federal government had available to many of the state's producers. We also were able to work with the legislature and get past what was called a loan origination program. Essentially, farmers who took out emergency loans to help get by because of their losses were able to get those without having to pay an origination fee. We've worked closely with USDA on a number of other emergency loan programs and disaster assistance. Unfortunately, based on some of the news that we've already heard, we're not expecting much of a drier season this year. In fact, I'm looking out my window now as it continues to rain somewhat heavily. So we're concerned with an industry as big as agriculture is in this state. Another season like we had last year would be devastating. It takes a long time to recover from a difficult growing season as it is. And there are farmers who are just now trying to harvest last year's crop. So it was a very challenging situation in a time when there was already trade difficulties, there was already low commodity prices. So this was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in a lot of situations. So the Department of Agriculture has set up a website. If you go to, let me just make sure I have it right, michigan.gov/MDARD, scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see Farm Crop Disaster Resources. We're currently working on updating that. We were hoping to hold a crop summit 2 weeks ago, which is something we did last year, where we bring together all of the commodity groups, all of the major stakeholders to kind of discuss what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they need. And last year that was really informative for us because we were able to make some requests to the USDA to bring about some programs that eased some of the restrictions on farmers with some of their crop insurance and things like that. So we're still hopeful at some point to hold that summit again this year. Obviously, it was canceled due to the ongoing coronavirus issue, but we're putting a page together that's going to be a little more updated, sort of talking about how, unfortunately, things don't seem like they're getting much better. But on our resource page, one of the really big things that we highlight is farmer mental health. There's been a lot of conversations about farm stress. Unfortunately, suicide rates among farmers are some of the highest of any industry. So in the governor's budget last year, we were able to include a $500,000 grant to MSU to help with their continuing outreach in that area. So we have those resources highlighted. We're working closely with MSU to make sure that farmers understand that there are people here for them to help them out in this time of need. The Department of Agriculture is a resource. And on this page that we currently have going, before we overhaul it, we have the governor's letter to the USDA, a little more information about the Ag Loan Origination Program. MSU Extension, they're an incredible resource for the agriculture community, and they've been immense, like I said, in the farm stress resources. And then USDA. USDA is a massive federal agency. They have a number of different tools that farmers can tap into, and we've tried to kind of basket them all up in one spot so farmers, producers, processors can find what they need there. Also, small business administration resources. So we're trying to be sort of a central clearinghouse for all the different things farmers can tap into. We continue to work with our partners in the legislature to talk about what different tools we can implement to be there for farmers in this time of need. And we're hoping maybe it stops raining for just a little bit for the next couple weeks. But like I said, the National Weather Service has told us they don't think that's the case. So we're watching this closely. This is sort of one of the lesser known impacts for some people, but still very critical with such a big industry. So we're hoping for some good news and some good growing weather. back to you.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And for those of you that are wondering, Josh did not have any slides, so you weren't missing anything. He just had the one slide.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we are running late on time, but I do want to make sure we get MDOT a chance to present here. So I'm going to turn over to Brad, and we will hold it past 7 a little bit for those of you that need to have some questions. So Brad, I'm going to send it over to you.
All right, seeing my screen?
Yep, we got you.
Fantastic. I am last in line, so I'll talk as quickly as I can and get through there. So hopefully we can get to some questions. With me on the line as well as Hal Zwang. He is the manager of our environmental services section. I want to talk to you a little bit about the impacts to MDOT specifically. Infrastructure was mentioned before. MDOT takes care of the M roads, I roads, US routes and whatnot, but I know that our local agency road partners are dealing with the same types of things. Vicki mentioned the road up with the county in Porcupine Mountains. But we are looking at areas all around the state. It's on every coastline, it's on every lake that Michigan touches. So this isn't an isolated thing that, oh, it's only on Lake Michigan or only on Lake Huron. We're seeing issues across the state. We're tracking about 40 different locations at MDOT were being affected by high waters. Just to give you a flavor of some of the things that we're looking at, this is over in Whitehall, looking across the bridge at Montague at the east end of White Lake. This is well inland. This is a few miles inland. This isn't even on the shoreline. But when the winds blow from the west hard, it pushes water up and onto the road. So we actually put these big bags, those big white things that you're seeing there are super sacks. They're full of sand. And they've essentially created a barrier that'll hold back the water. But in order to do that, we've had to close the 2 outside lanes on this road. And water that does fall on the roadway through rain or water that gets through, we end up having to pump out. So this isn't a shoreline erosion issue, but it's just another example of something that we're having to deal with that's a result of the high waters. Moving along, this is M185. Not sure how many people knew that the road around Mackinac Island was called M185. It's taken a beating. It really has. And we got folks out there right now. I believe we've spent about $1 million already trying to repair and get this thing in place. We're getting survey done right now that will hopefully enable us to get design and construction and get this thing back running by Memorial Day. You saw this one already, M25 over in Sanilac County. Gives you a better view of the utilities that are running through there. I believe that there's a gas main that runs through there as well, some sort of underground conduit. So far, we've actually armored the shore or the slope, the toe down here with some large rocks. So we're at least armoring the edge line, and we're in design of a pile wall that'll help support the roadway. This last one that I got is I-94 Business Loop, Benton Harbor, right in front of Whirlpool's headquarters. Again, this is not an on the lake issue. This is an inland issue. And again, when we get the heavy west winds, it pushes the water right up, essentially through our drainage systems and into the roadway. The road is built at an elevation, or the waters are so high right now that water simply can't get out. So we have to look at all kinds of fixes to be creative in how we're going to address this situation. I got my next slide here. We kind of broke it down into MDOT into what are the short-term things that we need to do. What's the immediate work that we need to do that's taking place to keep the roads open, to keep them safe? I have a number there that we've spent approximately $5 million so far. I haven't gone back to check the exact numbers. I'm quite sure it's higher than that right now. All of that funding is coming from our maintenance budgets. So this is the same maintenance budgets that plays for snow plows and salts and pothole filling and crack filling and some of the ditching and other things that we would normally do in a year. These monies are being spent on some things that we did not plan to spend them on. Long term, if we take all these 40 sites collectively across the state, and if what we're seeing right now doesn't subside, and I was really happy to hear earlier that somebody mentioned that we don't expect to see the record highs later in the year. But if this is a long-term issue, we could be looking at fixes that'll easily top $100 million. Because when we're having to deal with these issues on a long term, we're going to be looking at things like moving the roads inland, meaning we have to buy property, we have to move the road further away from the shoreline. That has happened. We're actually doing some of that right now up on US 2 near the Cut River Bridge. That was work that was already planned, a year or two ago. We may have to raise roads, literally take the grade and raise them up, which works well for the roadway, but it doesn't always work well. We can't do it everywhere because we can't drain water back or dam water back up on other properties. One of the other things that I didn't have a slide for, but one of Jared's slides reminded me, the river flows. We got a lot of water flowing down the rivers right now inland. And we have to deal with an effect on our foundations that are in rivers called scour. Essentially, as water flows by these foundations, kind of swirls and scours or erodes the material away around the foundation, creating some instability. So obviously, with more water flowing down, we would expect that we will have more scour. We haven't seen any issues with that, but when I see those types of charts that they were showing, it's something certainly that we need to keep an eye on. And if we get to these long-term fixes, if we start having to spend upwards of, even 50, 60, 70, over 100 million, there isn't an emergency pot of money right now for us. When there is a natural disaster, like a short-term event, we can work with Federal Highway Administration to get emergency road funds, or if there's a national declaration, FEMA funds. There's nothing for those right now. So all of these costs are going to be coming out of our own operational and capital programs, which means if we do get to long fixes like that, we would likely have to see projects that are currently planned in our 5-year program coming out. So that was about as fast as I could get through, and hopefully we left a little bit of time.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Yeah, so we got a little, we were supposed to go to 7 o'clock, but I want to make sure that we were able to get some questions in from our attendees. I mean, we got a lot of them. So I'm going to bring the presentation back here. And yeah, we're going to go through some questions. And we've got a lot of panelists on the line here, not only from the ones you've heard, but also got some panelists from State Police, Insurance and Financial Services Department, AG's Office, Department of Health and Human Services, and National Weather Service, too. So we got a lot of presenters and a lot of people on the panel to answer questions. Guys, I'm just going to start firing them at you. And for those of you that can stick around, please do. If you can't stick around online, we are recording the webinar, and I'll post it online and send a recording link to everyone that registered. So I'm going to start kind of towards the beginning. Well, I'll tell you this. First couple questions are for Jared. So Jared, I had several people asking about seawalls and what you recommend for seawalls. Is there like guidance on that?
There's no guidance. There's a pretty good document on the web page. It's a core document. I'm not going to quote the title right, about living on the lakeshore, living on the coast, and what your options are. And honestly, every site is different. The one thing, probably the most common thing that we see, and it's maybe the most versatile, is rock revetment. So large stone riprap revetment. For the most part, when people talk seawalls, when you talk steel seawall, typically we want people to put some type of rock in front of most of the structures that go in anyways. And that is because putting in a structure, you can easily transfer wave energies or create scour on the neighbor's property if you don't do it right. And the rock tends to break that energy up. So that's probably where we start the conversation, is with rock riprap. But again, we're running into all different kinds of situations. If the erosion gets bad enough, you may need a seawall or retaining wall to make sure that the home foundation doesn't fail. That's another reason to get started early. So there are a lot of options out there, but that's I think where we would typically advise people to start looking at, is rock riprap.
Okay, thanks, Jared. We also had a couple questions about inland lakes and your discussions about high water levels and precipitation levels, and how have we studied the effects on inland lakes and how does this affect them?
Yeah, so I mean, there's high water everywhere. So I mentioned in my presentation, well, hopefully I did. We are starting to see substantial problems on inland lakes, in particular kettle lakes, which are natural lakes that deposit out of the glaciers that don't have an outlet. They don't have a stream or river flowing out of them. It's just basically the lake, it's a hole in the ground intercepting groundwater. And the groundwater table has come up so much that in areas where in the lake where there's not an opportunity to drain that water off, it's coming up feet upon feet, and it's a huge impact. And I mentioned that it's on Shoreline erosion, we kind of know what the solutions are. The solutions inland are tougher, and we're going to move through like any permitting process we need as quickly as we can. But the solutions are not simple. You start like nobody needs water right now. So when you start taking water off of one inland lake, where are you going to put that? And you start getting into invasive species concerns and everything else. So for those folks who are listening who are experiencing that, they have a lake level that's coming up. Let's start talking solutions right now. Sometimes that may go through the Drain Commission. There's processes for starting a legal lake level, but you want to start those discussions before you start having homes flooded about what the solutions are. And it's also pretty expensive too, as the folks who have gone through it would tell you. So that's probably enough rambling on that, but it's a major concern.
Okay, thanks. Next question is probably Deanna or maybe even Andrew Dixon, who's with National Weather Service. Could you speak to the lack of ice pack and how that has impacted our current lake levels? What happened to the anticipated evaporation?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about that. So ice cover is an interesting variable as far as how it pertains to lake level. I always, when the lake is open, there's no ice cover, there's opportunity for evaporation to occur. So for example, this winter, we've had minimal ice cover. However, as I mentioned in the presentation, you really need cold air moving over the warm lake surface to induce evaporation. And what we saw in December and January in the Great Lakes Basin was that we were warmer than normal. Our winter was warmer than normal. So yes, the lakes remained open and that opportunity for evaporation was there. The temperature difference between the air and water was not significant enough to really induce a good amount of evaporation. We had below average evaporation in December and January. In February, we did see enough cold air outbreaks during the month where even though generally it was warmer, there was enough cold air to have a significant amount of evaporation. So it's very how then, when ice cover forms, if you got a lot of ice cover, then in that development of ice cover, you'd have significant amount of evaporation because you'd be creating that ice. And then of course, once ice cover is across the entire lake, that really ceases evaporation. So it's an interesting variable because it's really that evaporation is really dependent on that air to surface water temperature difference. So like this winter we didn't have a good amount of ice cover, but we also didn't really get as much evaporation as maybe you would think we did.
All right, thanks, Deanna. I don't know if Jared or somebody there on the team wants to answer this question. Are you working with township officials regarding issuing permits to allow heavy equipment to move through dunes adjacent to lakefront homeowners?
Yeah, so I think that's probably a Jared question. That's actually a new question for me. So I don't know that we're specifically doing that. It's not necessarily our role to tell the locals what to do with their frost laws. I would hope that they do have some, are treating that with some flexibility to make sure that people are at least able to protect their home, you know, to make sure that their home is not going to fail. But it's a new question for me, so I apologize. I don't have a really clean answer for it, but we've not really engaged with that.
I'm going to try to group a bunch of these into like one question for you, and that's just related to what options people should be looking at for protecting their beachfront properties. Some people have questions about, you know, do you recommend seawalls, or is there a better option? What about hay bales? They've noticed some people putting boulders in. What about the next door neighbors? Can you quickly summarize what your thoughts are on that, either Jared or someone there?
Yeah, it's Jared again. So I think that's pretty close to what I what I answered in the last question. Again, every single situation is different. But the most versatile and probably the most common and overall best solution is to start with large rock riprap. Not to sound dismissive, but things like straw bales, I frankly, to be direct about it, I think it'd kind of be probably wasting your time. This is a really, really unforgiving place to build structures. We have 10-foot waves coming in off the lakeshore. We have winter ice heave. You really need to build a structure that's built to last, and even then, probably plan on an ongoing maintenance cost as long as the water stays up, because again, it's just a really brutal place to build a structure. One thing I probably should have mentioned is I would really recommend, and I know the professionals that work in the industry feel this way too, is that you work together with your neighbors as much as what you can. We can process applications for multiple properties in one application, and it's really important that I mentioned like transferring wave energies. It's really important that if you have a bunch of structures built next to each other, a bunch of neighbors go together and come up with a unified plan so that it sort of acts as one piece of armor. Putting a bunch of stone out in front of one property next to a property that's not protected, you're still run a risk for failure there. The risk doesn't stop at property lines, and so it really would behoove you to work together with your neighbors to come up with a unified plan.
Okay, thanks, Jared. This next question is probably for James Grady of State Police, or maybe Jay Eicholt. Will the governor declare Lake Michigan and Huron a disaster area, and what will it take? So one of you guys want to take that one? Looks like James doesn't have his phone on. Jay, can you address that at all?
Yeah, I can address it, at least lead into it. Lieutenant Grady or Inspector Grady can jump on, that'd be great. The problem with this type of scenario and declaring or requesting a declaration or declaring an emergency is that for the Stafford Act, which all disasters are issued by, it does not include a way for us to count the damages that are being impacted by the rising lake levels. Usually you need a very finite or a hard date where the disaster started and when it ended. So it's like a tornado. You can say when it started and when it ended. This has been a multi-year long issue that's been going on out there. And so you just can't put a good start and end date of when did the disaster start and when did the disaster end, because the only thing that FEMA would be able to do would be to provide funding to get you back to pre-disaster condition. Well, we can't identify when the pre-disaster condition was because we can't say when it would start. Also, a lot of the damages that are out there right now is on private property, and the threshold for, excuse me, back up there, the threshold that the state would need to meet would be for uninsured losses. And that's a very high benchmark that we would need to meet. And unfortunately, as of right now, we are not there to request any federal assistance.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. I got a couple poll questions are going to pop up while we're answering these next few questions. So please answer them if you can. Next question. Municipalities need help with property owners in high bluff sandy areas where the state designation of high risk erosion areas was not made in 1986. Can local communities expect more assistance to planning commissions from EGLE?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things there. One, we have a unit that is a major part of their charge, or coastal zone unit, coastal management unit, is to work with local communities to do planning and to work through those processes. And there's even, I think, some grant dollars out there to local communities with that planning. And then the other thing, this is not, obviously hasn't gone through the budget cycle yet, but Governor Whitmer's proposed budget included $40 million for climate impacts. Certainly some of that would include some of the shoreline issues that are out there. 10 million of that 40 million was dedicated to planning. That, I guess, probably the biggest advice I would give to locals that are interested in advancing that conversation is to reach out, get a hold of us, and then let's see what tools we have in the toolbox to help you get going and help you keep going.
Okay, thanks. Next question is for Vicki. So since boating brings in so much money for Michigan in terms of tourism, will there be concerted effort to reconstruct the boat launches? Is the state able to apply for emergency funds?
There are no emergency funds to the best of my knowledge. We are just trying to address these one at a time. Oftentimes with the impact to the boat access sites, it's due to high water. And by that I mean the water level is rising so high that we lose maneuver areas, or we virtually lose most of the ramp. So these are not things that we can easily correct. So what we try and do is warn people. We try and help people adjust if we can to some, parking differently perhaps, but otherwise we just have to close them and wait for the water levels to go down. We know this is a cyclical impact, and so by the time that we would get the funding together, get the redesign done, chances are the water levels are going to go back down again. It feels a little bit like the emergency dredging we did back in 2013. And as soon as we finished the dredging, the lake levels went up. So it's unfortunately one of those, it's very inconvenient, but I don't foresee us making drastic capital changes to accommodate the high water levels.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. Couple more questions, then we're going to have to wrap it up for tonight, because I really appreciate the few hundred people that are still on. A couple of questions about will it be recorded? And I said yes, the webinar will be recorded today. A question for you, probably, Jared. Can shoreline improvements be made before permits are issued? Meaning ask for forgiveness rather than permission?
So there's that's a really common question. So ultimately the answer is no. Legally, we do have, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have worked with the situation is dire, like the helm's about ready to go in, and the contractor, you got a contractor lined up, you need to talk to us. That's the bottom line, is you make a phone call, talk to us. We have used what we call discretion, meaning, yep, okay, the home's about ready to go. Get out there, get to work, get us a permit app in the next week or whatever. So the risk you take if you do unpermitted work primarily is that essentially it's on you if it's not permittable afterwards. That permit not only gives you like the authority to do it, but it gives you the certainty that what you're putting in, if you follow the plans and directions in there, that what you're putting in is legal and it gets to stay there. These structures are very expensive to be done right. If you don't have to, it's not a great idea to just forge ahead, particularly when, you know, we are turning permits around really quickly. We are providing really good customer service. And so if you can work with someone and get an answer and get that definitive, yes, it's legal and it can be built like this, that's the best course of action. I want to make sure I separate that out from homes about ready to fall down the bluff. We just need to find a solution for that. If you have even a little bit of time, let's just find the right tool and make sure that you know everyone walks away happy and that you're protecting your neighbors and protecting your property.
All right, thanks. I think this will be our last question. And that is, there's several people asking this question, and that's the forecast out in the future in Lake Michigan, and what are we looking at? Some people are asking, you know, what's the maximum it can go up this year or the next 6 months? So, Deanna, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can address that. So as I mentioned, we do our forecast at the beginning of every month. So we will be conducting our new forecast next week, at the end of next week. When we did our beginning of March forecast for Lake Michigan Huron, from the February monthly mean level to the peak, which is the forecasted peak on Lake Michigan Huron is forecasted to occur in the month of July. That would be about an 8-inch rise from that February monthly mean to that July monthly mean. So that can, you know, gives you but like I said, we'll be updating our forecast next week. So, you know, that will change. But for now, I'd say about an 8-inch rise according to our most probable forecast. That would be following that green dashed line that I talked about in the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Deanna. Well, everybody, it's about 6:24. We've gone way over what we thought we'd be at 7 o'clock. We still have, 340 people on, and I really appreciate everybody's interest in this topic. We have a lot of questions that we did not get to, and I apologize for that. I will let you know, though, that we are tracking all these questions, and we'll be putting them in a spreadsheet, and I'll be sharing with the team here. And, the hope is, as we look at these questions, and there's a lot of similar types of questions, we'll be able to do more frequently asked questions, put more of those documents out there, and get you more information. And since you registered for this webinar, it's likely you'll probably get an email from me fairly soon with details on where you can find more information, and when I'll also send you an email as soon as the recording's available. So, we're going to try to keep you all in touch and informed of what's going on. I'm glad to see some.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
Jim, this is Jerry. Can I just jump in really quick?
Yeah.
So there probably are tons of questions, and we'll try to do the best we can to answer them. But if you go to the website Jim's got up there, the michigan.gov/high water, there's a frequently asked questions document on there that probably answers a lot of the questions that people are asking. So.
Yeah, I'll include a link to that in a follow-up email. So I'll include a link to that. And I think there's plans for some more of these high water meetings. Jared, can you speak to that too?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure that they have. I'm not sure that they've solidified yet. But yeah, I think initially we intended to do one virtually and then to move around the state and to do town hall type work at several locations around the state. That's obviously on hold right now. So I think as soon as we wrap this one up, we likely will start planning for what we'll do next. We've tossed around a few different ideas about should we make them more topical, like just focus on shoreline erosion, just focus on infrastructure. But we haven't really solidified that yet. just really wanted to get this one out, and then we'll figure it out from there. But there is more to come for sure.
Yeah, okay, Jared. Yeah, and we'll let you all know if that happens. I'll be sending in my email a link to an evaluation. Please take a minute to be a really short evaluation. Let us know what you thought about this webinar, this town hall. That kind of helps us out. So take a minute to complete that when you get it from me. Hey, I want to thank all of our presenters today for taking time out to present this evening, as well as the panelists that were on. We'll be sharing all these questions with them so they can take a look at them and get back to you if they need to. And I want to thank all of you who are joining us tonight and took time out of your busy schedules and your evening to learn more about high water in Michigan. I appreciate your commitment to Michigan's environment and making it a better place. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.